Happy politics, and yes, I caught you bobbing your head along to the music. It's very catchy. This is BC Poly Hot Stove, and I am your host. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by somebody wearing a very beautiful pink shirt. Bye.
Happy Pink Shirt Day, Maclean. It's Jordan Bateman, Vice President Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, and all of us here at ICBA today are decked out in our pink to support anti-bullying initiatives and the CKNW Children's Fund.
And it means that you have to be nice today.
Look, there's bullying, and then there's holding people to account for the public policy and political decisions they're making, and we don't apologize for being fierce in our opposition to poorly thought out policies that hurt the common man.
Well said. And I mean, what better way to seg into the big news of the day and the week? Budget. The provincial budget was tabled yesterday. Jordan, I mean, we could literally talk about the entire show and not cover everything. It's a big thing. Why don't we start with just sort of your overall takeaways, and then we can get into some nitty gritty if you want.
Yeah, look, I'm not quite into the nitty-gritty yet. Obviously, the BC government, Minister Robinson, made some questionable decisions as far as who to exclude from budget lockup. ICBA was one of them. 35 plus years in budget lockup, but not this year in a giant room, which capacity said could have easily accommodated us and many others. I noticed the Vancouver Board of Trade wasn't there either, but we can talk about that in a second. So did not get the briefing that the media got on this, but some high-level takeaways for me. The first thing I always do is look at the debt number. Look, I know Rob Shaw has a piece on the Orca, and he's like, no one gives a flying fig Newton about debt. But at some point we will. At some point, debt actually becomes a bill that has to be paid. And in an era where we're about to see interest rates increase, and folks with variable rate mortgages like me are thinking to themselves, should I lock in now? Like, how long do I play with the roulette wheel? Government will be impacted by those interest rate increases. And we're seeing a debt that will be $125 billion by 2025. To put that into context, that's 2025. A decade earlier, 2015, it was only $63 billion. The NDP will have doubled the debt in a decade. And that should cause all of us to pause for a second. Just think of that for a second. That is not good news. I don't care about the debt to GDP lipstick on a pig that Selena Robinson tried to, and in fairness, every finance minister in BC in recent history, including Mike DeYoung and Kevin Falcon and Carol James, all have tried to point out there. $125 billion with no plan to pay it down, and interest rates about to creep up. That's when you start getting into some trouble.
I want to talk about interest rates for a second, because one of the things, in fact, I think the first thing that struck me when I was first reading the documents was interest rates are very much a double-edged sword in that they are listed as the primary reason why the province thinks the rampant increase in house prices, or home prices, will slow down a little. Not go down, but slow down. The increase will slow down is because of rising interest rates, which is not something the province controls. But rising interest rates are also listed as one of the risks to the economic outlook, largely for the reasons you just explained, which is that the province's debt will become more and more expensive just to service. I don't have it in front of me, but one of the graphs the province helpfully provided yesterday shared just how much money they were spending on interest. Yes, back in the 90s, when the debt was skyrocketing even then. It was a remarkable chart for an NDP finance minister to share, but she did. And so as interest rates increase, so our debt will become more and more expensive.
I thought Adrian Dix backdated all those old charts from the 90s. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, especially given the fact that Horgan, Jeff Meggs, Adrian Dix, key figures from the 90s. Listen, Canada had to learn this lesson in the 1990s, and it was Paul Martin, a federal Liberal prime minister, who really had to, and finance minister, who had to deliver on it. Canada, Wall Street Journal published an op-ed, Canada's in danger of being a third world country. Our debt levels were so out of control and so high. And, Martin had to bring in a budget that didn't just freeze spending, but actually cut spending, program spending, quite substantially in order to balance the budget and get Canada onto a better fiscal footing, which then paid off, a decade later in the Great Recession of 2008. Canada was in much better shape to handle it. Stephen Harper was the beneficiary of that. And now, 12 years after that deficit, Canada was still in fairly reasonable shape. Although Justin Trudeau has blown the doors off of all spending limits and whatnot and taken it to $1 trillion debt now for the national government. Debt matters. There were stats, some governments spend, not BC, but some governments will spend 15, 20, 25 cents of every tax dollar they collect just on servicing debt. And that's great. People will be like, wow, it's all going towards something, right? That bridge or that hospital or whatever. Yes, but what you're doing is you're tying the hands of future governments to be able to respond to crises like COVID, like another recession, like what happens, when we blow $1 billion hole in the forestry industry. These are big problems going forward. And then on the affordability issue, here's what I would say about that. Yes, higher interest rates will theoretically slow housing price increases. Not stop them, but slow them.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it will make owning homes a lot more expensive for people who came in with minimum payments. And that's frankly probably a ton of people who come in with a minimum payment in order to buy a home. This cheap debt era is coming to a close, and it's not you're trading one affordability problem for another affordability problem. And I don't think the NDP government have got their head around that. There are some really questionable things in there. The NDP government, claiming that gasoline taxes will go up 1% a year. I don't see that. My sense is gasoline is only going to become, TransLink said the opposite. They expect things to fall because people don't buy as much gasoline because they have electric vehicles and other things, and cars are always getting more fuel efficient. So these kind of weird mixed signals in the budget, I find very difficult to discern exactly what the NDP is suggesting here.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Rob's column, and what I took from that was not, that debt doesn't matter. It's that the public appetite for deficit spending is much more than it was 2 years ago for obvious reasons. And so with that in mind, the NDP kind of passed on this budget on a chance to really tackle the big emerging issue in BC and Canada, which is affordability and inflation. There isn't a lot in there that's going to make life a lot cheaper. Selena Robinson was asked this a few times yesterday, and she kept pivoting back to childcare, which is great. I've got a child in childcare right now, but I mean, that's happening because of Ottawa's largesse. It's not really anything. It's being delivered by the province, and that's good. But it wouldn't happen without, Uncle Justin and the federal government spending lots and lots and lots of money. There isn't a lot in the province's budget that's going to make life less expensive or more affordable in the near future.
Yeah, just the opposite. In fact, the way they're delivering some of these programs means they get less value for the dollar, which is a big problem. You talk about childcare. By cutting out private childcare providers, treating them shabbily, and essentially trying to chase them out of business, you're actually lowering your spending power on those childcare dollars. Childcare is an important affordability issue for very specific windows in time in a family's life. And at a time where we're seeing the birth rate plunge, and maybe this will help bring it back up, it's possible, although we haven't seen that in Quebec. It is a very narrow time. So childcare for, my wife and I, not you and I, Maclean, we don't have 3 kids. My wife and I have 3 kids. They're 18, 15, and 11. There was almost a test there. And
which I hope you passed.
For a decade, childcare was a big deal to us. We made sacrifices to figure out how to take care of our preschoolers and toddlers. But now, that's kind of a distant memory. Okay, great. My wife works with single moms. I understand the economic arguments for going for childcare, but it doesn't make life more affordable for every family. Far from it. It's very narrow windows in time. So to hang everything on that, and to hang it on a federal dollar transfer, and admitting yourselves that $10 a day daycare is a pipe dream. If they get to $20 a day, that'll be something. Which still. Significant saving. I'm not just dissing that, but again, it's removing that private component. We see it in construction, removing, not letting 85% of construction companies bid on projects because you've slapped a union-only monopoly on it. That raises the cost of construction, thus making sure that taxpayers get less bang for their buck. These decisions matter, but government doesn't seem to there's no price tag too high for virtue signaling or paying off their base, apparently, as we're seeing with the child care model and the union model.
We could talk the entire rest of the podcast about affordability. I'm convinced this is the next big issue in BC and Canadian politics because, it's just undeniable. Everyone's bills are going up across the board, and it's not just your taxes, which usually only go up, only go in one direction, which is up. It's your grocery bill. I just renewed my car insurance. That was $1,000 lighter than I was an hour ago. It's everything.
No, Davey tells me you've saved thousands on your car insurance. By the way, most interesting thing, Selena Robinson letting it slip that it really wasn't their no fault model that's saving or that's generating a lot of ICBC profit. It's investment income.
Yeah, and it was a one-off too. So It was they switched their portfolio, and we actually asked this, and the answer is kind of boring, and I don't want to lose any more of our audience than we do in our sports section, but essentially it was a one-off. They transferred their investment portfolio, did very well, but even ICBC isn't pretending it's any more than a one-time windfall. Yeah.
Well, just keep switching your portfolio, like firing coaches if you're the if you're a bad NFL team. That is. Budget was. I'm intrigued by the coverage of the budget, and you and I can talk about this as we go forward. I'll get to that in a second. The other thing I want to mention is it's budget related but separate legislation. Selena Robinson takes this opportunity to announce future deficits are coming, much larger deficits than this year. First of all, I find that weird. Like, okay, that's at some point the NDP have to go back to the polls and want to show some sort of like fiscal management. You think they'd want to trend out of the deficit. But then they're also scrapping, and it's largely symbolic, but the 10% salary holdback for cabinet ministers when the government's in deficit. I think those signals matter, right? Because what it says to the public service and to taxpayers is like, we don't want to be in deficit, and we're putting our own pay stubs on the line when we are. And so this must be important if we're in deficit at this point because we're taking pay cuts, or it gives you that little like nudge, like it reminds ministers all the time, like, hey, make better financial decisions. I'm surprised to see them scrap that, like just the symbolism of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It seems, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say petty, but it's so minuscule, and cabinet ministers are well compensated. They are not, no one's saying they're going to be working as volunteers, but this was a law that was put in place as, I think you're right, largely as a symbolic gesture that, look, if things go sideways in this ministry, I won't collect my full salary because this performance matters. It's the money that's allocated to them by their own finance minister, right? Like, presumably it's a reasonable amount of money to achieve their goals. Now, in extraordinary circumstances, with COVID, with wildfires, of course. But across the board, no. Why wouldn't you keep it? And again, we're just talking about 10% of a very generous salary.
Yeah, no, I agree. Speaking of climate change, Ty Olson had an interesting piece on the Fraser Valley Current looking at the budget envelope for essentially rebuilding Lytton, the wild Sumas Prairie, all Sumas Lake, all those different horrible things that have happened over the past few years. And his theory is, he's looked at all of the reports as to what you would need to do for diking, for example, the Fraser Valley and all these different things. He's like, this is nowhere near enough money to both fix what's happened and to prepare for the next crisis. And I find it really, I'm a little nervous about a government that, like, think of all of the crazy stuff that's happened since 2020, like since February 2020, and you have a government that's underfunding mitigation matters, while at the same time raising carbon taxes again that have been delinked from revenue neutrality, yet not applying those carbon taxes to climate change mitigation. Like, to me, it makes me nervous. Like, I know there's contingency funds, and I know the NDP will say, oh, well, there's always money in the banana stand, like on Arrested Development. We'll find it if we need it. But we haven't seen it this year, right? Like, Lytton is still exactly as it is the day it was evacuated. Nothing has happened there. Sumas Lake farmers, Sumas Prairie farmers have heard lots of great things about agricultural money coming, but they haven't seen checks yet in their bank accounts. As
a quick aside, you should read Deanie Moore's piece in the Orca about farm flood aid and how it it's been incredibly difficult to get. It's choked in red tape, and what has been made available so far is just simply not enough. And in the family she spoke to, I mean, living off their own credit cards, and it's obviously not sustainable. I mean, these are real people. Their names and their faces are in the story. I encourage you to read it, and they're not alone.
Yeah, and it's been a long time. Like for Lytton. So one of the stories I heard out of the BC Liberal Leadership Campaign was one of the memberships that got flagged for being potentially illegal or incorrect was this family who listed a hotel as their residency. So one of the campaign that signed them up called and said, hey, listen, you've listed this hotel, parties asked us to investigate, what's the story, and they're like, well, we were evacuated from our homes in Lytton 6 months ago, whatever it was, and we haven't been able to get back, and we're living in this hotel. They got to vote, by the way, and good on them.
That's good.
But like, there are displaced families from that community who are terrified that they'll never have anything to go back to. And I'm not sure that this budget envelope gives them much hope on that. Other things, like no money for Taylor Bridge in Northeast BC. I know that's not a big deal to those of us in the Lower Mainland. It's a huge deal to the peace and to the oil and gas heartland of British Columbia. Massey Tunnel, the Massey Crossing, they have a 2030 completion date in there, $4.14 billion they expect to spend. By the way, not in this 3-year plan. This 3-year plan is just, a few $100 million. But that shows you 2030 might be, I think, is very optimistic for this government. Even though it seems a long way off, this is a government that doesn't have a single environmental permit to build that bridge. So, we're talking, if it's 8 years from now, that's a remarkable accomplishment. We think it'll be more like a decade. And again, that bridge would have been open right now if the Christy Clark plan had been allowed to continue. So a lot of things, I know that a lot of groups like mine are spending the rest of the week starting to comb through the budget because we weren't given access to the actual lockup. And who knows what else will come out in the coming days.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the lockup. I'm sure there are people listening and watching who don't understand what we're talking about. Every year in the provincial budget, we enter what's called lockup. And it's literally that. We're locked in a conference room. We have to surrender our cell phones. There's no internet connection. We're basically, you have to sit down with the budget, which is like this. You get to talk to ministry officials. The finance minister answers questions. When I say we, I mean the media. Stakeholders get to do the exact same thing. Ordinarily. And the great thing about the stakeholders being there is groups like yourself, but I mean everyone, the Canadian Federation of Labor, universities, chambers of commerce, boards of trade, you name it, they all obviously are going to have their own individual take on the budget and what it means for the people and groups they represent. And this is a good thing. Because it's just, you'll see things that would never occur to the average reporter. So it's been crucial to be able to talk to stakeholders and say, well, what did you think of this? Is this going to help or hurt the file that you are an expert on? This year, because of COVID, that list was much reduced. You yourself were not on it. We were not able to see in person any of the stakeholders.
Really?
We were given they were in, if you know Victoria, the reporters were in the convention center and the stakeholders were across the street at Crystal Garden, and we never met. We got to submit 2 requests for stakeholders we'd like to speak to, just 2. And then there were 4 virtual scrums that happened at once, and there were 4 groups of them. So you sometimes had to pick and choose. You'd go in and you'd line up and you'd wait to talk to, Bridget Anderson, and then running down the hall and talk to, Paul Kershaw from Generation Squeeze. But that was it. We never actually got to see them. We got to chat much like we are right now, but you get a question instead of, a scrum where you just sort of let them riff.
Okay, well, let's dissect this a little bit, Maclean.
First of all, Jordan's going to have to take off the pink shirt here.
First of all, earmuffs kids, the idea that COVID stopped them from having a budget lockup is bullshit. It's bullshit. It's an outright lie. And you know it's an outright lie because I was at a hockey game on Saturday night with 18,000 of my closest friends. Like, give me a break. Give me a break that it's COVID. That is, it's a falsehood from the NDP government, and they should be held to account for it. We've appealed after the PHO orders changed. We appealed one last time. We were told, no, some people might not be comfortable with it. Well, I don't care. The people who aren't comfortable with it should be the people who stay home, not the people who want to be there, following PHO orders and getting access to the proper briefing that these people deserve. Second of all, we'll be filing an FOI request, although I'm sure Bob Macken's beaten me to it, very shortly, asking for the invitation list for this and asking for all the various emails and documents that are related to who decided which stakeholders got to go to the Crystal Palace and which did not. By the way, no virtual lockup in Vancouver. So if you're a Vancouver reporter, you're out of luck. The Vancouver Board of Trade, you mentioned Bridget Anderson, the Vancouver Board of Trade put out a press release saying they weren't there. So I'm not sure if they were there or not, but...
as far as we spoke virtually. I know she was one of the people I did speak to,
but
she was standing in front of a camera with a generic backdrop.
That's interesting. So maybe the Board of Trade didn't have their policy people in there. Maybe they were limited to one.
They probably were limited to one. Some organizations, and I do have a list. Some organizations had 2 people there, which I know is only going to make you angrier.
Yes, please, Maclean, may I request that list if it's not some sort of private embargo jargon?
Well, it does have phone numbers and emails on it, but I
don't care about that.
Individuals,
I just want the list of, just give me the list of names and organizations.
I think it's reasonable.
Listen, it is ridiculous that this was done in this format. Selena Robinson opened her remarks. I watched a little YouTube video this morning. I can't wait to have everyone in person again. Oh, sure you can't. Sure you can't. You could have had it this year. Like that, I know of groups that were left out. Terry Lake's BC Care Provider Shop, for example, did not have a person there. Tell me what's been more important. Like, name a sector that's had more scrutiny during COVID than long-term care. And you're telling me that they're not even invited to a lockup that they've been to for decades? Come on. Like, it just smacked of message control, shunting people away. I am really surprised that in a room I think seats 1,000 people, that they kept it to what? So if there's no stakeholders there, you must have been, 25 media?
Yeah, I didn't count. That'd be about accurate. A lot of people were registered, didn't show up. There were empty tables, and I have no idea why, and I don't want to speculate, but I sat next to at least 2, empty tables with name tags on them. And then the silly part, Jordan, was the ministry staff were in the same room with us, but we weren't allowed to talk to them more than one at a time. So we would have to stand in line at a table, and sort of, if you craned, you could listen. And in at least three cases with me, I was hearing them answer the exact same question I wanted to ask, but you're not allowed to lean in and just say, well, I don't want to waste your time. Can I just listen? No, you got to stand your 2 feet back. And occasionally the reporters would just sort of choose to misbehave slightly and just crowd in a little and say, can you just say that bit again? Because there's no reason to waste these people's time. You don't need to answer the same question 3 different times, especially if there's another question behind me that's completely different. It was better than last year. I'll give them that, because last year was a disaster. And the people who ran the event with the parameters they gave did a pretty good job. But, there was no reason for us to stand in line, and there was certainly no reason to exclude usual stakeholders like yourself.
That's unbelievable to me. Unbelievable to me. Talk about people who've been living in a friggin' bubble. Listen, welcome to the real world. Lots of us have been going to the office every day, and no more at risk for COVID. Maybe actually less at risk for COVID because we're in a professionally HVAC'd office building. And I'm just. How are the media questions, Maclean? So with fewer media in the room, I don't want to name names. You can tell me offline which reporters were there or not there. It's not.
It wouldn't surprise you. It's the usual names were there.
Yeah.
A couple of exceptions for, and I don't know the reasons why. Most of the press gallery was there, and the questions were good. I think almost everyone who wanted to ask a question did, as far as I can tell. But it's the same. You get to ask one and a follow up, and the media did their jobs. It's just. It's hard to explain if you're not in the room.
Yeah.
The stakeholders being there is really crucial. because you really do need that different perspective. You will see things that I just won't, because usually the reporters are looking for the big picture, and as is the way it should be. Yeah. But aside from sort of specialist reporters like Nelson Bennett from Business in Vancouver was there, Bloomberg sent a person whose name I apologize, I don't remember. They'll have their own different things they're looking for. But for myself, Rob Shaw, Vaughn Palmer, or Shannon Waters, of course they have to look at the big picture.
Yeah. Look, here's an example of the stakeholder thing, right? So I think one of the announcements was $25 million for tourism. So you would like to have had the head of Tourism BC, the Tourism Vancouver, the Tourism Operators Association, the fisheries operation, like the fishing lodge groups. Like you'd like to have those groups, access to those groups, so you can go over to them and be like, hey, 25 million for tourism, is that good? Is that bad? And tourism would be like, well, crap, we haven't had any tourists for the last 2 years because, and it was falling off a cliff and cruises were canceled and blah, blah, blah. So, this is drop in a bucket. Or they may say, hey, 25 million, whew, thank goodness, finally we can start bailing out some of these guys who are on the real cusp of, you just get that kind of feedback, right?
Exactly. That's a really good example, actually.
Yeah, forestry. Forestry revenues are going to be down $1 billion because the NDP are pandering to poorly informed professional protest groups in a desperate attempt to shore up their left-wing eco-nut flank. And, you don't have the Truck Loggers Association there. The truck loggers who are going to see tens of thousands of jobs lost, forest communities shut down, mills shut down because of this short-sighted policy that isn't based in any reality, which, by the way, is that British Columbia has the most sustainable forestry practices in the world. They don't have any opportunity to speak out to that. $1 billion hole blown into a legacy forest legacy industry in this province, one of the foundational industries of this province. A whole new ministry set up that's going to add even more bureaucracy to what's going on. The Land Wars Ministry, as you've dubbed it. I know you're really trying to make Land Wars stick, and I appreciate it. I feel you. But no one there to talk about that. Indigenous, you have what was it, 70 million or something for a new Indigenous secretariat to deal with the UNDRIP?
It's not that much, but yes, it's a new body to, exactly that. Go through all existing legislation and make sure it's aligned with UNDRIP.
Yeah, you'd sort of like to have as many First Nations, Indigenous, Métis Nation, British Columbia, as many of those groups as possible in the room to talk about it. But you can't. So, you get your one little scrub and, hopefully hopefully you pick the right thing. These are important issues. The reason they lock you up in budget is so that you don't get pre-knowledge of something and go out and change investment strategies and make money. And that tells you it matters. The fact that they make you sign all of these confidential agreements to get briefed on it. There's consequences to these things. But, in BC NDP land, I guess the fewer people who are there, the better. And maybe no one cares. Maybe the public are like, oh, well, who gives a crap if Jordan Bateman's in the budget lockup? I took the day off, so it wasn't all bad for me. But at the same time, you should be concerned. This is another, item in the long growing pattern of the NDP government, shirking transparency, shirking responsibility, shirking accountability, whether it's the FOI stuff. These are problems. Autism is another great one. No funding in there for the hub model, which, by the way, Ontario has just scrapped. And, I'm assuming there weren't a lot of autism parents groups in that virtual lockout to talk about it.
Not that I could see. Yeah. The other thing that is useful in the lockup, the way it's normally done, is you mentioned, autism groups and a couple other organizations. So what some of them will do, knowing that their issues, I don't want to say niche, but very specific, they'll actually print a rapid reaction and just hand it off to the reporters. I mean, groups that you probably wouldn't have talked to. I mean, the Sierra Club came by my desk a couple of years ago and be like, hey, this is what we think of the budget. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will read this. And these are useful. And even if you aren't going to go and, take 10 minutes of your time and go talk to them, at least you have it if you want to use it. It's just, these are very useful things. I really, really hope the province moves back to a more traditional model next year. Yeah,
look, in my previous times with CTF and ICBA, I would have an op-ed, a news release, a series of tweets, a video all ready to go, and immediately start posting as soon as lockup lifts. It just smacks of message control, and I hate that from government. And this government is just dipping further and further into these sort of decisions.
And again, the point here is not that there were limits, is that there were limits after the province had lifted limits. If the budget had happened a month ago, okay, they have to make difficult choices, and you're not going to like the choices probably. But there's not even that fig leaf now. It's just, well, you can reopen it. The Dr. Bonnie Henry says it's okay, and if other people are uncomfortable, well, too bad. They're not allowed to empty out the McDonald's when they walk in either.
Yeah. No. Well, thank you very much, Maclean. That is exactly correct. You're bang on. And it's not like they had 38 hours or 36 hours notice. They had 8 days of notice. Yeah. And we have asked businesses to pivot on much shorter timelines than that. Remember when we killed New Year's Eve parties and thousands of restaurants had to throw out food and make other plans? We forced them to pivot like that, and government itself won't do it. They did it because they could get away with it, and I think it stinks.
We have, and speaking of niche issues, budget lockup is probably a niche issue for.
This is what you come here for, people. You don't come here for. You want the niche. Look, if you want the broad-based, BC is all warm and fuzzy and great, find a different podcast.
That's true.
That is.
Even though our tagline is happy politics. Speaking of politics, I want to ask you, we just went through a year, Jordan, where every week I would say, hey, can you give us an update on what's going on with the BC Liberal leadership race? And I thought, well, I'm going to kind of miss that segment because I learn, and it's always interesting. And lo and behold, there is another leadership race that you are in an excellent position to update us on. Obviously, I'm talking about the federal Conservatives. Between the federal Conservatives and the BC Liberals, I feel you probably think you are never not going to be in the middle of a leadership race.
No, just keep them coming over and over and over again. So Conservative leadership race. I am a Conservative Party member. I'm not on EDAs or anything like that. I'm not a terribly involved member, but I'll be interested to see what comes through the pipe and all of that. But I can tell you right now, all anyone is talking about in the Conservative movement is Pierre Poilievre. I don't even know if there's going to be a leadership race. It feels like perhaps kind of the red Tories in caucus or red Tories in the party will want to put someone forward. Tasha Carradine, former Canadian Taxpayers Federation spokesperson, so she's smart. Jean Charest was thrown around by Christy Clark this morning on Curse of Politics, highly touted by her. I
didn't see that. She endorsed him, sort of?
Yes, although I got to say, Christy, I'm not sure that, I like Christy. I'm not sure her endorsements are going to go over great with the conservative world, but whatever. There seems to be kind of grasping for this, but honestly, lots of people I talk to, super excited about it. Key organizers, I've yet to hear of any key organizer in the Conservative side who isn't, working for Poilievre already, isn't volunteering, isn't, helping set up different apparatuses in different provinces. It's a real land rush. Everyone wants to buy a land in Poilievre, in Pierreville. So interesting to see. It feels a little bit like, the comparison is John Horgan when he became NDP leader and didn't actually go through a leadership race, right? Everyone else just dropped out and Horgan was the one left holding the bag, and then, a miracle.
It was just going to be a two-person race, and then, Mike Farnworth decided he didn't want the job. And fair enough, but you're right. It became a very easy path for John Horgan. Yeah,
and then, a Darryl Pleckus turncoat moment later, and he's the Premier of British Columbia. You wonder if the same could happen for Poilievre, where everyone else is like, man, this guy's got the money, the organization, the talent, and the grassroots going. Why bother? What I hear from kind of conservatives who aren't members but are sort of lean that way voting wise is they really like Pierre. They know him, they've heard of him, they've seen a video of his, they follow him on social media or something, and my general perception of him up to now would be he'll be great with fiscal conservatives and probably more with men than with women. I don't see that. He's got good crossover appeal. I can't game out in my mind another candidate who's going to come into this race and make it any kind of contest whatsoever.
I don't know him. Well, I don't know him personally at all, but just from watching him, he actually sort of strikes me as not a bad person for the Conservatives to put forward right now. purely on presentation alone, because I get the sense that Canada is kind of craving, how do I put this in a way that won't offend anyone I know, a more serious turn in politics.
Substance.
What's that? Yeah,
Substance.
some substance. And Pierre Poilievre, whatever he's like behind the scenes, it presents a very sort of serious and businesslike demeanor, which I think, after all of the drama we've had for the last few years, I think that actually has a chance to be more appealing than it might otherwise. Again, who knows what'll happen in a campaign? He could step in it. He could embarrass himself. I have no idea. But just on his presentation, I actually don't think it's a bad bet.
Yeah, there's some parallels. There's some lessons to learn from Trudeau and Harper, right? Pierre would be, disliked by the mainstream media, by the Ottawa Press Gallery, in a way that Harper was. The difference is we live in a post-media world where not post-media, but a post-media world, where
Yes.
Pierre can go directly to the people with his messaging through social media. And he's been very successful at that up till now, in a way that Stephen Harper never was, or never had to be, because social media was still nascent at his time. He also, I've seen some clips circulating of, dumb things Pierre has said in the past, weird comments and things like that. That is, would be more worrisome in a mass media world, or in a world where the current occupant of the Prime Minister's office hadn't dressed in black and brown face multiple occasions with those videos out there. Like, you can't be forgiving of one and not forgiving of the other. And I'm not saying anything that Pierre has done equates in any way with that kind of racist behavior. And because it doesn't, like, the comments I've seen are not equal. But it does kind of let you, it's just hard for the like the whataboutism, right?
No, and you're right in that you talk about whataboutism. I haven't seen this clip. I don't know off the top of my head what silly things he said. I'm sure they're true. But whoever the next Conservative leader is, the Liberals, the NDP, the Greens will all have the same kind of attack. And these things are constant. The NDP would have all the attention they're foisting on Kevin Falcon would be just as pointed if we were talking about Ellis Ross or Michael Lee or Stan Sipos today. The point is when the constant barrage of partisan attacks is just that constant, you start to, it doesn't really matter. It loses its impact. You start to think, well, okay, the Liberals say this about Pierre Poilievre. They were saying that about the other three guys. And they're going to say it about whoever the next guy is, and vice versa. It's not like Justin Trudeau hasn't received his slings and arrows. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think people stop paying attention because it's just sort of constant din, and they're not wrong. They have a point, Jordan.
Yeah, not to quote Christie again, but her thing on Curse of Politics this morning was that people are just tired of politics being in their face all the time. Yeah. Like, the average human just doesn't care enough about it, and we see it in the States with the response to Trump, where, we were having 5 A-level stories a day out of that guy, and people just were incredibly fatigued by the end, and just give me someone quiet. I don't care. That she was couching this around the convoy, like, people don't want the politics in their face like that. But, you can kind of see it again in this situation. So, yeah, Poilievre, I'm not sure you're going to get very good odds on betting on him, but get whatever odds you can and bet on him, because it doesn't seem like anyone else is coming out of the woodwork for this.
We'll see. Do we even have a date yet for that?
No date yet. I think they've struck the committee, but they should go sooner than later.
I agree. The sooner they move, the better, probably. Just because we just had a confidence vote. You never know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Which, listen. I didn't love the convoy. I didn't love what was going on there, with the fringes of it. But man, talk about an overreaction. The emergency measures, like, that's. I have, as a civil liberties guy, libertarian bent, I have real problems with it. Invoking that act at this time for that kind of thing. So.
I mean, you're not alone in that opinion. The act gives the government a lot of very draconian powers that, yeah.
And then to make it a confidence...
Hopefully this will be debated for a long time.
Yeah, and then to make it a confidence motion. Like, one thing I'd like to see is when the dust settles and it may take a Conservative government to do it, is adapt that act so that it cannot be a confidence motion.
That's
Because
actually an interesting idea.
why the hell should the prime minister? Like, the whole point of it is to put a check on the prime minister's powers during emergencies. Like by putting it through the House, why should it then be allowed to be a confidence motion?
Yeah. No, you're right, and especially it was risky in that the allegation about the convoy was that they want to bring down the government, because a lot of them said that.
Yeah.
So then you're then risking the government on a vote. Why would you? That doesn't make any sense to me. But okay. Politics.
They would have. Oh, that's true. If I had been defeated, they guess they technically would have won.
Yeah, right. Like it's just
not too late, Senate.
That's some really pretty risky poker you're playing there. And we're talking about a minority government here.
Yes. I'm propped up by the NDP, which used to be a party of the little guy, but
there's a lot. We can talk. There's a reason we normally talk about BC politics is that Ottawa is even crazier than Victoria these days.
Yes. Indeed. There's just, you worry about Canada going forward. I'm wearing an anti-bullying t-shirt, and we can talk about this in a second, but, I worry about Canada going forward in this continuing inability for us to disagree agreeably. And it is the Americanization of politics in Canada, and it's not the left or the right to blame. Everyone is to blame in Canada, by adopting this kind of mentality. And you and I, we cover, we talk about politics and stuff like that. John Horgan's not a bad human being because he brings in, union-only contracts for certain things. Like, these people are not, like the people we've been most critical of, we don't dislike, but we hold them to account for their things, and that's perfectly okay. But it's when you have the inability to even have any conversation among disagreeing opinions. That's a big divide and a big concern for me, and it does not bode well for the future of Canadian or BC democracy. So we've got to find ways to disagree agreeably. And that takes, frankly, grown-up leaders and people with fairly thick skins, and maybe a little bit more of skills around diplomacy than around debate.
Yeah, we try to disagree agreeably on this show, and on the Orca in general. I will say I have always said from day one that reasonable people can disagree. I have published things I don't agree with, and that's fine. I don't have to.
Yeah, no, for sure. Hey, Pink Shirt Day. We should talk about that.
Yes. It is and if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes or something, you don't see Jordan wearing his glorious pink shirt. I actually don't. I used to own a pink shirt, but I was looking for one this morning, both for myself and for my son, and struck out both times. But you're working in an office today. I'm in the home studio, so it's not so bad. Pink Shirt Day is a really good cause, which I encourage you to look up, and it's always kind of interesting watching the NDP adopt it, because it was brought to BC by Christy Clark, which is true. It's just a fact of history, which they will studiously ignore today.
Yeah, Christy Clark, then a CKNW talk show host. Here's a story from back east, I think the Maritimes, where a boy had been bullied in school for wearing a pink shirt. And the next day, his two best friends showed up wearing pink shirts, and the day after, the whole school showed up wearing pink shirts. And she was inspired by this, right? Like,
it's a cool story.
Pushing back against bullies. And so Pink Shirt Day was launched. It benefits the CKNW. It used to be the Orphans Fund, which was such a classic name. Now it's the CKNW, I got to get it right, Kids Fund. So we ordered shirts here at ICBA through their website in order to support the work that they're doing. But really, any pink shirt, just wear a little bit of pink, but more importantly, talk to your kids about the importance of standing up for the little guy, making sure no one's feeling left out or bullied. Bullying still happens. I think it happens less than when we were kids, Maclean. Like in my conversations with my kids about it. Although I do think it happens more in social media context than in real person context. The real person they're definitely real people, but in real life, a face-to-face context. But yeah, like, stand up, if you see something, say something. For us at ICBA, we have a big ICBA wellness program. We talk a lot about workplace wellness, mental health. We've seen the studies linking bullying and harassment and negative comments to people's mental health, exactly how it affects them. And not just how it affects the person being bullied, but how it affects everyone who's witnessed the bullying. And so we know this is very important at any age, in any setting. And really impressed with CKNW for continuing to push Pink Shirt Day. It's only grown. And we talk about Christy Clark's legacy, longest serving female premier of British Columbia, LNG, lots of different things. But Pink Shirt Day might be the thing that she's most remembered for years from now.
And maybe even secretly most proud of. I don't know that. I just it's a guess on my part. And yeah, you're right. It's the fact that it's become this national phenomenon. It's just it's awesome. I mean, you're a dad. I'm a dad. Talking to our kids about bullying is really important because I hope you're right. Because bullying was endemic when I was a kid, and I get the feeling that's starting to change, if only because we talk about it.
Yeah. Breaking the stigma is like such an important part of all this, right? Like making sure you can actually talk about it. There was a situation with my son recently, and a kid had made a decision, was going somewhere, and his dad texted me and a couple other dads saying, hey, he's doing this, can you talk to your kids, like, don't tease him? And so I kind of brought up with Jack, and I was like, hey, so-and-so's going to be doing this, so, just, be cool about it. And he's like, Dad, why wouldn't I be cool about it? Like, it didn't even occur to him. And I was like, boy, thank you. Like, okay, excellent. Good. You're a good human. You're a good egg. He was astonished I even had to address it with him. Like, why would we? Why would we make fun of that? Like, it's just a thing. Who cares? And like, perfect. So find someone, be nice, take care of each other. God knows we've been through a lot together these past 2 years. We've been through a lot together apart.
Yes.
Find a way to make sure that you're doing something positive today.
Find a way to make your politics happy.
Yes, there you go.
And on that note, there's probably no better way to end the show. For Jordan Bateman, I'm Maclean K. That's it. Happy politics.